this country's not going to be saved from the top, because that's where all the rot is. It's too deep. It's going to be saved from the grassroots.
G'day, folks. Hello from Australia here. This is the next edition of the Crossroads, and I'm joined by some of my friends today. One is Robert Klinck from Canada. Good morning, Robert.
Thanks for the greeting. I'm glad to be with you again.
Thank you. And then André, Meloche, also from Quebec side of Canada.
French part.
Good morning.
French part. Yes.
French part.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
And finally, Daniel on the far right there. Good morning, Daniel. You're with us this week. Your name got bandied about last week with the unemployment versus unempayment, which I think was a very incredible, important 3 words that I think everybody should get to hear. How are you this morning? All good.
I'm good, mate. Morning, gentlemen. Glad to be here.
Now, we've got a bit going on today. The first one that came to mind was when I was reading an article by Joe Nova, Bullied into Net Zero. And there's a saying, the borrower to the lender be a servant, basically. And that's exactly where net zero comes in with Australia, because on the Liberal side, which is in opposition at the moment to Labor, Scott Morrison and his treasurer, Mr. Josh Frydenberg, decided to go with a net zero approach because they were basically told by the global financiers, if you don't, we're going to jack up your interest rates by 1.5%. And according to all the models, it showed a 17% investment collapse. Now, that means, of course, that the foreign banks are setting our domestic agenda. There's to the borrower, you serve it to the lender. And I think that's something that, why do I bring it up? I bring it up because at the moment, the Liberal Party is really getting stuck into One Nation, which is one of our alternative parties, which everyone's calling far right, which it isn't. But they've got policies that are coming from the people and what the people want. And they've got virtually an open policy conversation happening continuously. And they're talking to people and they're trying to work out what it is that the country wants. But of course, Angus Taylor, who lost a few members to that, and the continued shake-up within the party, the Liberals and the Nationals, because they're a coalition. They've had several breakups over this very thing, over net zero. And one of the main leaders of the National Party then defected to One Nation. So it's in his interests to keep the heat up. But he's saying that if this other party gets in or gets any sort of control, then the country will go down the tubes, will be bankrupt. And yet he was part of the very country, the very political party that brought in net zero. And then when Labor come in, of course, they've pushed it again, and we've seen nothing but increased electricity prices, increased power prices, and a huge amount of spending on renewables, which if you actually start to do the maths and stuff inside it, they're not self-sustaining. You cannot hope to get your money back on them. We're seeing that with some of the wind farms that are now being torn down before they've been completely paid for. So all this stuff happened, and I think it's been the direct influence of the foreign banks that have set up this, the governments in general to do what they want us to do, and that is, become more and more into the same program that all the countries are going into. I know that Canada has a net zero policy, and I believe you've got some acres of trees there that are being planted to try and do carbon offsets, the same as what we're looking at here. Is a huge farm just been bought in Tasmania for that very reason. It's been bought by, get this, a foreign investment to plant trees to offset global emissions. How can they justify doing that, selling huge tracts of our country to a foreign company to do something? Hey, it's putting trees in the ground. I'm sure we could do it if we wanted to. Anyway, that said, Robert, any comments or any thoughts on the to the borrower to the servant, borrower to the lender be? I'd have to get that right.
If you're borrowing, you're subservient to the person who's lending you money, and they can dictate terms to you. And this is the whole basis of our financial system. And what social creditors object to is centralization of power. So you have a very small element in society being able to dictate to everybody else. But you mentioned your politician who had changed his stance on net zero, Neville. And haven't we seen this so often? I don't know why anybody pays any attention to what politicians say. You can pay attention to what they do, but what they say is purely calculated for electoral support reasons, and they're subject to influences once they get in power that the public has no power over, no control over. So it's time to stop listening to anything any politician says. We just had this fellow in the United States, Lindsey Graham, die suddenly. And he's another example of somebody who completely reversed his position. He had been running Donald Trump into the ground. He was saying he was the worst person in the world, practically, that he was inappropriate as a commander-in-chief for the military. And then bang, he's supporting him 100%. And just like Donald Trump, you know, he changed his tune once he got in power. He made all sorts of commitments. He said he would be friendly with Russia. That's not happening. He said that he would not have wars, you know, and it just all these broken promises. Politicians go together with broken promises. And therefore, we just shouldn't listen to the words they say because they can't be trusted, any of them. We can see what they're doing and we can judge what they're doing, but their words mean nothing. And I would think that anybody of any experience of politics would know this by now, but people are very slow to learn. They always have hope, you know, hope springs eternal. So
yes.
They think they'll get somebody in there who will do the right thing. But when the people get in there, they're not subject to the wishes of the people who put them there, who voted for them. They're subject to the money power, and they're subject to lobbyists, and you know, it's a different game when you get into politics. It's a complicated field. So, and this net zero business, you know, if you posit net zero as your goal, you have given yourself carte blanche to do anything, because who keeps the statistics on what constitutes net zero? You know, this is all manipulated stuff. Statistics is a big game too, just like politics. So we have in Canada a prime minister who was the primary promoter of net zero in the climate change area. He said that any company that doesn't have zero footprint for a carbon would not be allowed to continue in business. What a threat. But now he's become our prime minister through some magical process. I mean, the Liberal Party was doomed to disappear for another 20 years, but they brought Carney in, and then Trump, supposedly Carney's enemy, actually made Carney look good by his tariff policy. And so Canadian nationalism was fostered, and Carney got elected. But I think that Carney and Trump are part of the same cabal, and they manipulate these things internationally in order to arrive at the electoral results they want. So I don't pay attention to these politicians. They're just not worthy of our trust in any way. And it's time we erase them from our confidence, and we looked at not their words, because their words just can't be trusted, but we can look at their actions, if there are any, and we can judge them on that basis. But
yeah,
know,
that's
the population doesn't have control over policy. That's the problem.
Yeah. That's exactly the reason why I brought it up, because here he is denigrating people who have a different solution, and yet his actions show that he did exactly the same thing, or did the opposite to you can't trust him, as you say. But it's all a circus, the Trump Carney circus show, and it's all about gaining public opinion or manipulating the public view. And I think we see that so much. And every time we can point out these disparities where they're talking about one thing and doing another, I think we should be taking the chance to do it. André, you've seen similar things?
Well, the one thing that Robert was mentioning, you mentioned the bankers are bullying. First of all, it's the banksters. And second of all, whether you choose a whore from the conservative side or a whore from the liberal side, it's the same thing. They go where is the money. And after the Russian coup in 1917, you had two parties. You had the Bolshevik. Bolshoi in Russian means big. And you had the Menshevik. Menshevik was a small, what would call minority party, or the opposition. What they did is they just erase or obliterate the Menshevik, and after that, the Bolshevik took power. And they were bullying. I will use the term in the article. They were bullying people who did not agree with them. Then nothing has really changed when you think about what is happening now with politics. Trump did it in Iran. It's what we call inside trading. They manipulate the market through big press conference and press release and big declaration. And Robert was mentioning the fact that we don't have to pay attention to them, of course, but there's a lot of people who are following them. Then there's one other aspect about net zero. Net zero is carbon, and carbon is life. So net zero means no life. If you do not comply, I'm very serious. We're talking about fascism here. The structure of fascism is nothing against the state, and you will reward companies that comply with this net zero agenda, which is a completely nonsense. The expression is completely stupid. Or you will punish the companies that do not comply with the net zero agenda. What's net zero? There's no such thing as green energy. Every form of energy has an impact. And the funny part is they talk about the carbon footprint. I know why Carney now is flying all the time, everywhere around the planet to make deals or memory of understanding, which are nothing but just words. Because when he's flying, he doesn't have a footprint. Really, it is. We are peasants. We are walking on the land, and they are above us. And it up to a certain point, people are not realizing it because they are struggling with the economy that is being destroyed. And it is where, when we look at the common sense politics, the common sense politics would be the doctrine of Douglas, because it's neither socialism nor capitalism. It's something that addresses the real problem. And this is why sometimes I challenge any economist to come and debate about the doctrine. Bring some fact, because when you look at the national debt of Australia or the national debt of Canada, which are similar in terms of population, we are completely, it's already destroyed. Carney arrived in Canada. He did not destroy Canada. It was already destroyed. He's just saying, okay, we will shift toward oil and gas because we have to change our strategy. Of course, they're building data center. How can you supply those monstrous data center who will just enslave us more, if it is even possible? So I think, in a sense, people are not feeling pain enough. They will feel pain when, for example, they will have their bank account seized, or they will not be able to have, if they implement UBI, Universal Basic Income, they will not comply with the policy of the government. They will be punished. Their deposit will be seized, or they will, you will have an expiration date. You have $2,000 per month as UBI, but if you don't spend it, you lose it. It's like you have a gift card from a shop. After 6 months, it's over. You don't have it. So I think people are not suffering enough. Western countries, they're still comfortable in a sense. I think it will accelerate because we have the 2030 agenda, and they're not slowing down. They're just doubling down on the agenda like nothing is happening. For them, nothing is happening. The plan is going perfectly. They're doing something great, and people are completely hypnotized. But when the shock will arrive, 1929, the Great Depression, 2029, let's say they arrive and they create a Great Depression that will put people in despair. They will accept everything. And I think this is where they're heading. We have to pay attention to what they're doing, especially with those policies or those, like I always say, performative language.
Yeah, it's a lot of performative language, isn't it? You mentioned, of course, data centers, and when we're talking about, being a servant to the lender, we've seen that with the bringing in of net zero, but it's also to a degree, if the governments are being servants to the banks in that regard and creating this problem that we've got, then the governments are also part of the problem, which we know anyway. But we've got to look at what they're doing. And one thing that they're doing at the moment is with this data center and is with control of people. Daniel, over in Western Australia at the moment, you've got a government that's announcing it's having a trial of overt live facial recognition technology. And of course, it's all about working to keep you safe. Would you like to make a contribution in that regard, and then probably link it to bird flu? Because I think it's both of those things are going to be, you've got both of those on your doorstep at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So the first point I would like to make on the back of your comment about keeping you safe, cameras don't keep you safe. They only work after the fact. So if a crime is committed, the crime is committed irrespective of the camera being there or not. It only offers a recourse. But even in many instances, the cameras don't either work or they're on the wrong angle, and you're no longer able to capture the perpetrator, or at least hunt down the perpetrator. So the idea that these cameras actually keep you safe is a bit of a misnomer as far as I'm concerned. It's a bit of a misdirection because, again, it doesn't actually stop the crime from occurring in the first place. And many crimes occur in the first place either, I'm trying to remember where Douglas wrote about it, he talked about the cocaine trade and many other violent crimes. These are all done on the basis of obtaining money. So if we go back to the roots cause of the many crimes in the world, I'm quite convinced you will find that they have a monetary source. So the other thing with regards to this live facial recognition system, I'm of the opinion that I describe it as a roll-up. They have X amount of compute power. And that compute power can only process so many cameras and so many images per minute, per second, per hour. And so you have to start running trials to see how much you can actually flood your data centers, because they've only have a limited amount of, it's a large amount of processing power, but you can only process so much before you start overloading the system. And this is one of the reasons that I believe that data centers around the country are constantly being built, because the appetite for processing power is effectively insatiable. You can create more data than you can actually process. And on that note, many years ago, does anybody remember SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence? They used to have a program called SETI at Home, whereby you would receive data packets from the radio centers and you would process them on your home computer. And that's simply because the amount of data they were generating, they were unable to calculate or to process to give some kind of answer. And it's the same thing now. So these live trials of these facial recognition systems are basically, again, they're running up tests to see how much data they can shove into the system. And that will also come in with, so in 2027, all cars sold in the United States and Europe will be requiring driver-facing cameras to see if you're looking at the road or you're looking at your phone. And again, how many road users are on the road? Millions upon hundreds of millions. and they're going to need the data processing to be able to implement these remote controls. You wanted me to talk about the bird flu that's occurring. So I've got a bit of inside information there. What the government and the media report in regards to bird flu, my wife actually works in the chicken industry. She works at the abattoir where they process the chickens. No one cares. No one's concerned about what's coming down the pipeline, whether the bird's going to be sick. It's simply not a concern. They're not discussing it. And I mean, if you're working in that industry, while at the same time the government is coming along saying your industry is going to be decimated, wouldn't you pay attention? But that's just my point. Management's not concerned. The workers themselves are not concerned. They take great care at the farms themselves, the hatcheries they have. I'm trying to remember the specific. It's a biohazard risk. They have processes and procedures in place to minimize diseases coming onto site. I mean, one of the simplest things that they do is actually making you wear a new set of boots when you get there. You can't wear your shoes that you wore outside inside the farms. So I'm of the opinion that what is being presented in the media and from our government is being overblown to simply generate fear, and that fear is designed to generate compliance. And that's a lot of, when you really look into these things, a lot of things that are being said either by the government or by the media are designed to generate fear, and that fear will generate compliance from the population. We experienced it as just the COVID incidents we just had a few years back. I mean, for the first time in a long time, I was working and they were threatening my income by not saying, well, if you don't get the jabs, you're going to lose your income. But they were at the same time talking about how bad actually COVID is to be. But so that fear was their way of generating compliance within the population. And that when you are not secure in your position, you are reliant on your job for an income. When that income is threatened, of course you're going to basically do as you're told, because how else? We live in a moneyed economy. We live in a moneyed economy, and the only way that we get goods is through buying something, by having money. And that's where I like to. So last fortnight when I was here, we talked about the national dividend being an economic vote, but it's not simply an economic vote. It works as a bulwark against tyranny, because if you can't be punished for your opinions because you have an income, irrespective of your work, your position is secure and you're able to not be punished because of your personal views. And I was just orating social credit, and it was part 3, chapter 2. And I'll read, it's a bit of a long sentence, but I'll read it out regardless. Contemporaneously with this, he might also be a producer. And although it is very probable that the money incentive in the form of wages could be made small in comparison with the dividends he would receive as a shareholder, the relation between these two forms of effective demand offers a perfectly flexible method of transition from existing arrangements. And then it goes on to say, it renders each individual immune from economic penalization for his personal views, and thus forms the only effective bulwark against tyranny. And again, during COVID, we saw this example play out in real time with the Canadian truckers. They started getting a little bit antsy, they started protesting, and they just turned their bank accounts off. And when you've got no money and you can't buy food, you're just going to starve and you are going to wither and die. And that is one of the reasons we should both have cash, but we should also have a right to money, irrespective of an absolute and inalienable right to money, because it is how we largely survive. Most people are disconnected from the producing system. For example, I don't live on a farm. I don't grow wheat. I don't look after animals. So the only way I get it is from down the supermarket. How do I get my food from the supermarket? I buy it. So when the government comes along and threatens your income, it threatens your existence. And it's the most dangerous form of oppression that we have, as far as I'm concerned.
Good points, all good points, Daniel. I mean, you mentioned, first of all, the cocaine trade, what he was talking about, and the reason for crime in most cases, I guess you could say, would be for the pursuit of money. The reason for a lack of protest from a lot of people, like you said, because they depend upon their income, is also lack of money. And the time to stop and think and consider the implications of things within society that we're doing is also curtailed by the fact that we have to go out and work for that money. So in each case there, you're seeing, again, the servant is the borrower is the servant of the lender. So it is crucial that the social credit message gets out. With the bird flu also that I will just mention, I was noticing that your government has decided to, where are we? Basically allow volunteers to do bird flu testing. So I don't know whether they're going to use PCR tests or what they're doing, but they've been struggling to find enough of these Arctic terns and whatnot that are coming forward and dying on our shores. And they can take a pretty picture of a dead bird on a seashore and say, bird flu, bird flu, you know, in the usual panic way they do. So they're going to open it up to volunteers and, you know, bird specialists and fanciers and whatnot to go out there and do the testing for them. So are they looking? Are they looking to create fear because they're looking harder and harder and harder for something that they've never looked at before? How many of these ones have come over have had some sort of native bird flu anyway? I mean, they keep talking about the particular strain H5N1. But, you know, this is early days for testing for this stuff. How many, 20 years ago, what does it look like? When we're talking about cycles within the animal kingdom, population cycles go up and down all the time because of weather, because of disease, because of anything. We haven't monitored them. We haven't gone out there and said, oh, how much bird flu was in them, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, because bird flu has been around for a long time. It's a part of life. But now that they want to create fear porn, that's what they're doing. The other thing with the Western Australian government, they've got 5 lovely little pieces of safeguards on the data that they're collecting off all these cameras in this particular trial, this live trial. But I just noticed that, okay, these are all their intentions, but the reality is hacking can get into every one of those. So they might say that they're going to limit it under this department. They're going to destroy it after this time. And any alerts that they might get, they might retain until such time as that alert has been nullified, if it's whatever an alert determined is. And I can roll that straight into, like you said, what happened during COVID. We had to have our little piece of paper to enter a supermarket. We had to have the digital green screen of a vaccination report to say that you were vaccinated to be able to go to certain places. And if you didn't have one, you're ostracized. If they're using facial recognition and they flag everybody who decides not to get a bird flu shot as a precautionary, then what happens? They've actually got the system that didn't work during COVID. They've now got the ability to do it. And, that's probably one of the reasons why they're running this facial test. And probably one of the reasons why we're going hell for leather putting up data centers. It's certainly out of control, and people really need to think about it. Something we were talking about earlier before our podcast this morning was something from Canadian history, which I think is important, because not only can we talk about problems, but we also need to look at how we solve the problems, what we can do to turn this around. Canada's lucky. They've had a very good test or trial in one way, because they've actually had a social credit government in Alberta. Now, it wasn't a true social credit government, I must state that, because it became corrupted and didn't actually follow the true doctrines of what social credit should be. In the New Times survey this week, written by Helen Camara, I believe she's a Canadian writer from, I'm not exactly sure where, somewhere. She says, and I'll read the 2 quotes here. In the broader sweep of Canadian history, social credit stands as a powerful reminder that politics is often driven by real economic pain and a sense that the system is stacked against the ordinary people. So she's saying basically that politics can be driven by what the people are feeling in the way of economic pain. If it's strong enough, then they're going to look for something else. And if they have a sense that the government or the system is stacked against them, it is also a very big driver to actually step outside of your safe boundaries and actually vote differently, or start looking at a different concept. And she goes on to say, and this is embodied in a belief that ordinary citizens armed with the right ideas and leaders who spoke their language could challenge entrenched powers and demand a fair deal. Now, to me, and I know it was Bible Bill Aberhart, Bible Bill Aberhart, who led the Social Credit Party, that's as far as I'm understanding. And he had a pretty good broadcast on a Sunday where he was preaching. So he had a fair following to start with, and the very nature of the way he spoke and the way several of the people involved in that spoke, they had good oration skills. They were able to get to the Canadian people. But we saw it wither and fall, I guess for many reasons, but we also need to look, therefore, why it did and how we can change around the things that happened there, so that instead of the people getting some small relief for a short time by a slight modification of the current system, how are we to encourage enough people to realize that this system needs a total overhaul, needs to be turned into a real representation of what our economy should look like, of the real world. So, Robert, you were there at the time, or during that time you were active. Would you like to correct my mistakes, please?
I don't go back to 1935, but I'm getting old.
Not quite.
But my father was actually a student in the high school that William Aberhart was the principal of. And he was in a debating society there. So he was acquainted with William Aberhart, on a personal level, not a lot probably. He was just a student there. But William Aberhart had a religious broadcast. And Alberta was a very religious province at the time. It was Protestant in nature, but because of this broadcast, William Aberhart was well known, and somebody clued him into social credit. So he started to talk about social credit in the broadcast, with the result that when the next election came up in 1935, there were all kinds of candidates who ran as social creditors. And in that election, the social creditors won 56 of 63 seats. I think it's the most dramatic electoral victory in Canadian history. But William Aberhart didn't run. He was just a voice on the radio. But of course, because his influence had been so great, he was drafted. And somebody stepped aside and made a seat available for him. So he got elected in that seat, and then he became the premier of the province. And he was the premier from 1935 to 1943. And they established a different kind of political approach there. They weren't just talking about policies to get votes, but they actually had study groups set up in all the constituencies. They were trying to educate the population about social credit. It was not the clearest exposition of social credit. There were a lot of misunderstandings, but still the idea was that the population should understand why they're supporting something in politics. It's not just a matter of a good smile and a good personality and a bunch of promises. It's a matter of there being something real going on in the world, and people should understand it and try to, if it's not working well, correct it through the political process. But anyway, William Aberhart sort of abandoned the promotion of social credit because he became a supporter of the war effort in the Second World War, 1939, and Canada got in right after Britain did. So But toward the end of the war, in 1943, he gave a speech on the radio, and he said, make no mistake, we have not abandoned social credit, and we are going to promote this. And he said, we are going to fight international finance. It's creating a totally unrealistic understanding of the world for the public, and we're going to straighten this out. And 2 weeks later, he was dead. Sometimes politicians die, and he was not an old man. He was in his 60s. He was traveling in British Columbia, and apparently he ate a salad on a train, and he died. Not only did he die, but he was not returned to, his body was not returned to Alberta, and he was cremated. So if there was any evidence of foul play, there was no way of establishing that. Anyway, that was how social credit got going in Alberta. But subsequently, Aberhart's chief lieutenant, a guy named Ernest Manning, who had been a dedicated social creditor too, but after Manning turned up dead, Ernest Manning made a trip to New York. And he came back, he went there with his wife came back in all kinds of finery. And after that, there was no more active promotion of social credit doctrine in Alberta. The province was fortunate in discovering oil in 1947, so it became relatively prosperous. And the popular interest in social credit, which had been extreme during the Depression because Alberta was just ruined. You know, it was a rural community. People were losing their farms and committing suicide. It was a dreadful thing. And so when prosperity came in the form of oil revenue to the province, it sort of removed a lot of the reform zeal. But that government, that in name, social credit government, remained in power continuously for 35 years. Quite a phenomenon. And by the time it left, there wasn't much of social credit left in it at all. But that's the story of a political party. A political party will inevitably become corrupted because it will be infiltrated. It will dilute its, if it was a pure hearted thing initially, it will dilute its message over time because it has to appeal to an electorate that doesn't understand what its objectives are. You know, you're always compromising when you're in politics. Anybody who's been in contact with politicians will know this. They'll tell them whatever they want them to hear. But that's not what you want. You want a politician to have a clear policy that you can understand and support if it's good. But that's not the way our party politics works. It's a very corrupt system, and it's really irremediable. You can't correct it because it's the nature of the thing. You know, I think that Thomas Jefferson said that if ever the United States went into got a system of party politics, it would be the end of the country. And we can certainly see that it's not doing very well with its political system now. You know, it's left and right and Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, and all this back and forth. But nothing of substance ever seems to get done in politics that will actually benefit the population. We're all sold out by the politicians who are in the back pocket of the bankers, and they just want to plunge us into an unrepayable sea of debt. And they've got all of us in that position now. I mean, if you understand how money comes into being, that debt is possibly not legitimate. I would say definitely not legitimate. But people will have to understand that before we get out from the burden that it imposes on us.
Yeah, the yoke of debt. It's like we said, you know, it's connected to everything that is bad in the world in some way, because people haven't got money. They've got to find a way to do it. And if the only means they've got is illegal or bad, then just to survive, they need to do it. We talked about in Australia here, people getting sent to or deported to Australia, or suffering from transportation. The original convicts that came here and settled because they stole a loaf of bread to feed their family. There's a definite difference, but the means that people go to actually keep themselves going means that if they're looking for money, which is what we need to have these days, then that's what they need to do. And as our moral understanding of the world and how it works disintegrates, then so too does the intent of the crime. So I didn't mean to denigrate you with your age there, Robert. I was certainly not meaning to say that you were around when Aberhart was there. It was more that the fact that you were in politics in that area afterwards, so you certainly would have seen the fallout. André, from the point of view of what happened and what we should be doing different, Robert said something about it's the seeds of the ideas that social credit needs to be understood by the people, and they need to push it rather than actually forming a party. That's probably what I got out of the article out of the New Times. We've got all sorts of ideas. We've got realities expressed very capably by Dr. Oliver Haydorn in his books of what the potential is if we actually revamp the system, the economic system, to reflect what happens in reality. I just find it difficult. It's the transition between having the knowledge and getting it out there. And that's something I think we all need to discuss, and we probably need to go further. Would you like to make any comments on the whole concept there we've been talking about?
I was listening to the fantastic story of William Eberhart when Robert was describing it. What strikes me is that, and I always think about this phrase, never let a good crisis, never waste a good crisis, meaning that if you have a crisis, so you can either change the attention of people toward what is happening, do it. And I think in 1935, when Eberhart was elected, it was the Great Depression. So like Robert mentioned, people were eager to believe something. They needed hope. So they had it with this system. And I think it would have brought the international banking system to its knees. So up to a certain point, when your enemy knows what you're doing, of course, you cannot expect that he will stand still and not do nothing. So I think they reacted. And do they corrupt politicians? Of course. But politicians, are they corruptible? When you go to politics, you should be able to understand that your role is to sell an idea. They talk about political science today. Science is one thing. Politics is the art of rhetoric. So it's the art of selling something. If I look at the history of social credit, especially in Canada, I see that it was not a lack of authority. I think the authority and the leadership were there, but maybe there was the opportunity was not seized, in the sense that there was the depression, and then they brought the war. And the war created a boom in the economy. And then you saved the financial system. They saved the financial system with the war. We're in 2026 now. We fast forward 100 years. They're talking about a major conflict between Europe or practically the entire world against Russia or China. They're preparing the same scenario. What fascinates me is that they're not very genuine. They're not very creative. They always use the same structure: fear. Danielle mentioned it earlier: fear and compliance, and it works. So how we would do something differently? We were talking backstage about the crisis of authority. Having a good leadership, somebody who will explain the doctrine without any false interpretation, something that is hardcore description of the doctrine based on fact. That's what Douglas was doing. He was basing his doctrine on fact, how he observed the economic system. Then after that, you invite contradictors. You invite people to come and challenge the doctrine, because the more they will challenge it, the more they will be convinced. And maybe you will have somebody that is renowned economist who will say, well, Douglas is right. And then you can tackle the real problem. That's the first part of the leadership. Then you need also communication, and you need to be able to spread the message through the population. So it has to be simple enough so people will understand it, because, you know, macroeconomy is not always easy, especially expert. They always use very complex language to, I would say, to throw some I would say some brightness in your eyes. So it seems so complicated. When you look at the national debt, it's not very complicated. Those systems don't work. They do not work. So I think, in a sense, 100 years of history and now more, you look at it and you could say, okay, let's create a group of people who will build a strategic plan, communication plan, and see which kind of population you want to reach. Young people, older generation, men, women, labor force, middle class, and how you can address the message. It's not because you want to pander to a certain category of people, but you want to make it digestible. It has to be appealing. They have to recognize something. John Paul Berg is mentioning, for example, for the left, fairness, having a fair society. This is appealing for the left. For the right, individual freedom, the possibility of entrepreneurship. So you have those characteristics of the doctrine of Douglas that are incredible. When you read the book slowly, you understand that the system is complex, but it is very solid. This is why I think they cannot challenge it. And this is why they, in my opinion, I think they wanted to suppress it, because it is a direct aim at the international finance. So I think that's maybe the first diagnosis that I would do. Then after that, you have the long history of those political parties that were successful, but then suddenly they started to dilute, because, like Bob was mentioning, they changed their position. They tried to adapt their message. I think, in a sense, we have to make a good postmortem of what happened, what was the real history, what were the good strategies, and the strategies that could be improved, so you could build something new for the new generation.
Right, and you mentioned, of course, there, John Paul's talk about fairness, which appeals to the left, and individual freedom, which appeals to the right. We've got all these divides that have been artificially created within our society, and each one seems to think they're at the throats of the other opposition, when in reality, each of them has similarities, probably more similarities than they do differences. And I think, yeah, we've got to make that digestible, as you said. Digestible is a very good word. Daniel, yeah, you got a fair scope there to work with. Any comments there? Your time, your study, and your orations.
I'll actually follow on from my quote from Douglas in regards to the social credit. So when he talks about the national dividend being the only effective bulwark against tyranny, I mentioned last fortnight how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not, I'm just trying to find my document, here it is. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights mentions a bunch of rights, but no right to money. But if you, I just reread it the other day, and it popped out to me. It's in the preamble, so it's literally within the first 3 paragraphs. Whereas it is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression. And that is what we experience through the financial system. And that's why we're here. We are rebelling against this tyranny and this oppression. So it won't come from our politicians, as Eric Butler says at the beginning of this broadcast. We're not going to be saved from the top. That's where all the rot is. It's going to be saved from the grassroots. So it comes down to the individual being aware of their options. I'll just put a link in the chat box to put up on the screen. But when we talk about a simplified version of getting the message out, this document is from a Fremantle newspaper from the Fremantle Advocate from 1933. But long story short, for every dollar brought forward in production, you need a dollar brought forward to buy it, because there is a gap between prices and incomes. This document was actually fundamental for me as well, because it was simple enough to reaffirm two pillar documents that I believe in, but are factual evidence because they come from the horse's mouth. The first one is the Bank of England 2014 Q1 statement, money creation in the modern economy. And the second one is from a credentialed economist, Richard A. Werner. Again, let me find out what I named it here. Can banks individually create money out of nothing? The theories and the empirical evidence. Richard A. Werner was given access to a local community bank when he got himself a mortgage, and he was able to observe the state of the computers when the loan was given. The bank account was empty, and then all of a sudden, the money was in the account. Modern money, bank credit, is nothing but accountancy. And for many people, that is actually quite an incredible statement. They can't, because once you come to this conception that money does in fact come from nothing, that doesn't congeal with their own experience in life of, well, why don't we have enough money? And why does the politician say we don't have enough money for this project or that project? It's impossible to say you don't have enough money when you simultaneously have the manpower, the raw resources, and the skills and knowledge to actually do something. Because unless you are actually saying you don't have the manpower, the skills, knowledge, and the machinery necessary to do something, only then can you say you don't have enough money. Because as I understand Douglas, money is a reflection of the real credit of the community, not financial credit, but the real credit of the community. So if you go back to that other RBA statement, just as a closing note, long story short, from what I interpreted of the RBA, it was a recent statement, 8th of July, so it was just recently published. They are saying the quiet part out loud. My interpretation of that statement from the RBA is that they're trying to increase unemployment to decrease inflation. And one has nothing to do with the other, quite frankly. There are two types of inflation. There is cost push, where a business incurs a cost and therefore has to be reflected in prices. And then there's demand pull, where too many people have too much money in their pocket and the business is incapable of delivering the demand. Therefore, they put their prices up to ease off on the consumption. But that never happens. That never happens, because every single time you go to the shop, there's always something on the shelves to buy. But it's not only that. When they show you the facilities that manufacture the goods that exist in the modern world, they are pumping. They are pushing products out at an incredible rate. This is why there is an argument that we actually live in a post-scarcity society, because the rate of production is absolutely magnificent. It's something humanity can be genuinely proud of. It's part of the cultural heritage, and we all have an interest in it because it is what we rely on in the modern day. We're not just if you go back, say, 400 or 500 years ago, your economy was effectively a local economy, and you had products and goods and services that were sourced effectively within a 10 to 15 kilometer radius of where you live. We now live in an internationalized global economy where you can get goods of any kind, of any description, and of any quality made in quantities that if we went back even just 150 years ago, they would not believe how fast and capable we are of producing. So the jewel of any nation is their productive system. And it's why I'm genuinely concerned about Australia, because too many of this country's been deindustrialized to a point where our actual safety, either putting food in our belly, clothes on our back, shoes on our feet, is being demolished, absolutely demolished. It's being shipped over to the third world. Remember, Eric Butler was talking about the machines being shipped to Korea. Now look at Korea. They're an amazing economy. They produce computer chips, cars, and they're of good quality. There's no reason we can't have that in Australia. Even the electricity prices going through the roof in this country isn't a reflection of the real economy, the ability to actually generate electricity. We have oil. We have coal. I know coal's a dirty word, but there are alternative methods of burning coal that isn't so polluting. It's called chemical loop combustion. It's an ability to burn coal without all the dirty back end. It's because there's a whole bunch of literature about it. So if you're interested in the amount of coal that we've got in this country and burning it cleanly, chemical loop combustion is a method by which you can do so and generate electricity that way. We have uranium. Nuclear power would be a fantastic method in this country. I mean, I despise the fields upon fields of those solar panels. They are so ugly. And more often than not, I don't know, and it's a curious thing to me, but they quite frequently take farming land where you grow something that is keeping someone alive, and then they just let it go fallow and put solar panels over the top of it. Are you mad? I'm quite convinced people would prefer to eat than actually have electricity in their homes. I mean, it's absolutely essential we do, but we don't need to compromise on electricity generation and food production. We have a magical rock where we can boil the kettle and make electricity that way. Like, it seems magical only because it's an advanced technology. Was it H.G. Wells? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic?
Magic.
Yeah. We're there. We're there. It seems... I mean, I laugh at it, and it sounds funny to say out in a public forum, but it's true. I mean, we have the ability to generate electricity in the abundance necessary to run all the factories, all the homes. I remember reading some months back, it was in Queensland, they had a price increase. So you had pensioners turning off either the air conditioning in the summer or turning off their heating during the winter just because they couldn't afford their electricity bills. I mean, could you imagine going through life, hitting retirement age, and then being uncomfortable simply because you didn't have enough money? The thing which comes from nothing? And your government allows this? As André was saying, it's not fair. It's simply not fair. We are being abused and exploited, and it's creating both physical hardships, but the mental strain that is associated with it. And if I was a lot more philosophical, I'd be able to give you the reasonings why, but you can just intuitively tell that is not the way you're meant to live. It's just not fair, and I don't believe our old people should be treated that way. If you're on the pension, and it's hot, they can't afford to turn the aircon on. It's just, no. They've paid their dues in society. They've built up the world. They've given us, they've carried on. They've given us something to look forward to, but so, yeah, they should be looked after to a greater degree than we are, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Daniel. Daniel, yes, excellent. Yes, we do. We're in a rebellion against the financial system, which is essentially what it is, because the realities of the world will show us one thing, and the financial system says that's not possible, even though we know full well that it is possible because we have the technology, we have the materials, and we have the manpower, and that is the thing that we struggle with, I think, more than anything else in today's society. Like you said, H.G. Wells said, predicted all sorts of things, but if you don't understand something and we can still do it, it might look like magic, but the reality is it's magic that we've performed, and it's something that as a society we have inherited from those who came before us. It's already been done, it's already been paid for, it's already been discovered. It really is. We're an inventive group. We can do all sorts of things we want, and somehow we just don't seem to be able to invent a financial system that allows us to do what we need. Get your head around that, because that's as you say, how can people not see that? And that's essentially what we are looking at. It's man created or man continued, because we're not willing to deal with the issues that we have. That's my phone going off too, silly. I didn't put it on phone. Thank you very much, guys, for today. Have any of you got anything else just briefly to say, to sum up, or all good?
Well, just one thing. You were mentioning, Daniel was mentioning coal. In 2025, there were 50 power plants that were built, coal power plants that were built in China for 78 gigawatt power. So deindustrialization seems to touch only the Western world. Maybe that's what people have to understand. We don't have to go there. We don't have to go there. Net zero is a scam.
Yeah, yeah. At the top of the hour, we sort of said we come in talking about the financial control for net zero, because the bank said, "Hey, if you don't go this way, we're going to jack your interest rates up." And we are a servant to the banks, and we shouldn't be. And I think if everybody gets that through their head, that money is not, as scarce as it should be. It's not as scarce as it appears to be. It's a reflection of what we can really do in the world. Then I think that's what will turn this around. When we get to that point, André, as you said, if we're looking for another Great Depression, or when we get to that point where this crisis comes up, this one crisis, we need to have that solution ready to push out there for people to see, and not rely upon the solution that we know that the likes of the WF are going to say, "Here you are, this is what we're going to do," or the Chinese CCP. We don't want those. We want true Douglas credit. And we'll have another crack at getting the message across again next week. And I thank you for your participation today, and I've enjoyed it. So thank you very much, guys, and bye from the Crossroads today.
This country's not going to be saved from the top, because that's where all the rotting. It's too deep. It's going to be saved from the grassroots.